Hi, welcome to Project Geospatial. I'm Adam Simmons. With me again is for Adam and Darryl View the World, Darryl Murdoch. And Darryl, go ahead and introduce this round, the guest for this session.
Well, thank you, Adam, and hi everybody. Awfully pleased today to have with us Mark Dumas, and Mark is a man of many talents, and I wish we had 4 hours to spend with Mark today because then we could spend an hour each on four of the bazillion topics that Mark is quite literally an expert at. Mark, why don't you give a little sketch of the various things, because I'm trying to remember the first time we actually met was well over a decade ago. Why don't you tell folks right now what you're working on at present, and then we'll kind of jump into some other stuff because I think what you're working on is some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. After we sold Planet Risk, we sold the products group to Everbridge. We sold the services group to Culmen International, and I met with Dan Burkhan, the CEO of Culmen International, and we drew up a deal for me to help him build up a technology practice over there. So we're working on some things. And in that light, we completed recently, not too recently, about 2 years ago, the Centrifuge acquisition. And we've been doing some things that are interesting with that under an NGA CRADA that I think this audience would be interested in. And we're looking at how we can scale that up and potentially open source elements of that technology as we look to build potentially a platform around that. And we're working a lot with commercial big data around IoT and mobile device data and doing some insight analytics around that currently.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, so CRADA is a cooperative research and development agreement. It's basically a no-cost contract that allows private entities like Culmen International to be able to interact with the government, and you can exchange ideas, you can exchange data. It's just a no-cost contract, so they don't actually pay for anything that happens. And so
research project, a reason for that.
Yeah.
Because the government can't ask you to do something for free.
For free, exactly.
So you can put a CRADA in place.
Yeah.
Then you can provide free R&D services around government requirements for the hope that if you achieve something that the government's looking for, you can basically set yourself up for actual revenue at some point, which of course is the name of the game.
Yeah, it is, right? And it's kind of an interesting, it's a really unique form that can be used it's also used by academia to work with government where there's no money involved, because academia very often just lacks access to experts, right? So right? And so they just say, hey, look, we've got an idea that we want to work on. I know that my good friend Todd Backestel up at Penn State has got a CRADA with NGA. And he talks to analysts, and that was really the deal. It's like, hey, look, we have all this expertise in teaching GeoAnt, but we need access to GeoAnt analysts.
Well, I brought Todd into the industry.
Yes, so you did. Why I brought him up. That's a great story. Why don't you tell that story? It's actually pretty funny.
Yeah. So I was the CEO and founder of SPADAC, and it was a great company, and a lot of people are still there. That company is the nucleus of Maxar Services Group still to this day. A lot of great folks are there, like Rob Torres and Jim Stokes and so forth. And we started that company in 2002, sold it in 2010. And I had some investors there, First Mark Capital out of New York, and Todd was interning for First Mark Capital. And as we prepared to exit the business in 2010, they, obviously you talk to your investors, and they said, we'd like to send this guy down there, help you get stuff, ready to go and work the models and all that. So all right, meet the guy, because his dad works at Penn State in the geospatial arena. And so we basically brought Todd down to help us with SPADAC. And when we sold it, he slipped right into GeoEye like everybody else, and he got the bug. And he's been in geospatial since, hardcore since 2010, I guess. If he's out there listening, he'll appreciate that.
Yeah.
We'll make sure we tag him when we post it.
Yeah, we definitely will. And we'll probably tag his dad, too. I was just chatting with his dad a couple of days ago. And Todd's very quick to point out he is not a junior, right? Because they have a different middle name. So
that's right.
Todd.
Yeah, but he met his wife because because of me, because of the whole deal. So that was a life-changing moment for that young man.
So he owes you.
Totally.
Time. Yes.
Yeah, over at GeoEye. If I hadn't sold to GeoEye, he wouldn't have met his wife. How about them apples?
Oh, gotta love that, man. It's always that type of
You gotta love a good story.
yeah, that is a great story. So, talk to us a little bit about. So, one of the things that's near and dear to my heart, that is how to enable early stage companies to really realize their goals, right? So, I mean, I often say to people as they say, "Oh, I got a great idea to do something." I said, "Great, okay. So, how are you going to pay for it?" Right? And it's like I always say, romance ain't got no chance without finance. And it's a mantra that it may sound really stupid, but it's really true, right?
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about angel investing, investment capital, and just kind of it's a crazy world. There's lots of different facets to it. I'm seeing some really interesting stuff out there right now, right? I'm seeing there are 3 different entities. I won't use their names because I don't want to get them all upset. That are quite honestly and purposely moving into spaces that you and I have been in for a long time. And they're obviously putting together these building blocks. You can see them. There's one company that there's been 5 acquisitions in 2 years, and they're all by the same folks, right? And so they're obviously growing capability. And this is kind of a very well established institutional investors doing that. But I also know that you're involved with some other really early stage capital. So whichever way you'd like to go on this, maybe start from the early stage, and then move out a little bit. Yeah.
I'll start with context. When we sold SpadeAct to GeoEye, obviously multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company on NASDAQ, talking with Matt O'Connell, I said, "Hey, I'll run special projects for you," and we basically did strategic investment out of GeoEye. And we missed out on some good stuff, though. Boy, we did. And I can't go into that publicly here, but it was good. And
what a tease, man. That's
I know. I was just thinking about.
I mean, I
want to bring up the deals.
Mark, you and I both don't work for GeoEye anymore. That company's long gone.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to bring up the deals we didn't do, but there's some regrets there. I wish I'd been a little bit more emotional about some of those deals and push the board, but we did some, and then we later on I started a very prolific angel group that still exists today in the DC area called Riverbend Capital, and named after Riverbend Park, which is right around the corner from me here in Great Falls, and we do a lot of early stage investing. We've probably done 50 deals in 4.5 years, which is quite a bit, and it's not a fund; it's an angel group. So if the audience doesn't know that, there's like 1,000 or 2,000 angel groups in the U.S., and it's a lot of times it's just people getting together and passing the hat. They get pitches from companies, and they'll write a check for 100 or 200 grand because there literally is, figuratively, there's a hat going around the table, and people kind of tossing money in, and not everybody participates, right? It's just maybe 10% of the audience. And I got about 75 members, and we're growing. So we've done some stuff. So in our world, we participated in the native deal, and we like that because I like the idea of collecting data off of mobile phones around, a unique value proposition where people are essentially mechanical Turks, but they're geospatially distributed to go collect data, but in this specific area. And here's the data we want, and we want it kind of clean, and we want the survey data. So we like native. We've also got another one called Patrocinium, which is a threat and safety application around where people are in a building. And, that one is, and there's all kinds of stuff that can happen in a building. And, long ago when I was just a technology coder, specifically a coder, I worked on the Oklahoma City bombing scenario after the fact to model what would happen to any generic building for the National Guard anywhere in the United States. We could literally take a building, we could sort of create a model of it, and we could put a bomb around it and go, what would happen structurally with 90% accuracy? And if something like that happens, you want to know where people are, because a lot of people did live, right? They're stranded, and then or anything. Look at Las Vegas with the shooter. Where are people in that scenario? And so Patrocinium is working on, if people opt into that and they're in a corporate environment, you can essentially know where people are if something happens and threaten safety. And so we did that one as well. And that recently had got another round. Native is doing really well as well. So we've done some early stage geospatial investing at Riverbend Capital for context. And if you want, we can get into some of those factors that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get. Okay, so there are folks that listen from to the program that actually are early stage. They're startups. So kind of walk through the process and talk about the factors when you're evaluating somebody. What are you looking for?
Yeah, basically we call it the dogs are sniffing the dog food. And I got that expression from.
I'm not sure that's what they're sniffing, but okay.
Yeah, and there is a customer that is really intrigued by what's happening, and the pre-money valuation essentially is a function of how many of those customers, and are they starting to write checks? And the more that people are potentially interested in the solution that can be verified in the course of due diligence, the essentially the more likelihood of the funding, right? I mean, it makes sense. If you got 1,000 people in line thinking this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they're intending to fund it at some point when it's ready or along the way, it's going to have a high pre-money valuation, and we're likely to participate if we think that we're not too late and it's too expensive for us. On the other hand, there may be just a few parties interested in something, and it gives us some kind of perspective that there could be a lot more. Like, just, okay, if these 3 people are interested and they haven't really marketed it, and our imagination says this is a very big TAM, and that marketing can be solved if the solution is real, then hey, that might be a good bet. From an investor perspective, it's probably got a lower valuation, so there's a little bit more upside actually in some ways. So we're looking at that. As far as techniques for the entrepreneur, I think the number one thing is revenue cures all, as I say, and I don't care what type of revenue, it cures everything. If they're selling themselves as services to keep the lights on, to develop a product, that's cool. If they're building a technology-enabled services company with high gross margins, that's cool. That's valuable. I would know that. That's SpadeAC, right? We sold that for a lot of money. Yep. If it's if they're getting license revenue, which a lot of people focus on in the sort of the SaaS world and the DaaS world, that's cool. But if anything, revenue, when you get somebody to give you money or the intent to give you money, you have achieved something. You have proven that there's something somebody feels is worth buying.
So as long as you're not going to starting from scratch, basically going to an investor and say, hey, I got nothing. I'm not selling anything. I'm trying to sell you on a concept that's dry.
Right. Now, you can do concepts, but there's been concepts that get funded, but you can't ask for a huge valuation. And there are investors at every perspective of the risk return curve. And the investors that invest in concepts are looking for a huge return because they're making 100 bets and only 5 are going to pay off.
Yeah.
But when they pay off, they're like 100x. So the math works for some multiple of invested capital return, like, 10x over the portfolio because of those 2 or 3. So if you're a huge PE fund looking for 3x returns, you just don't want to lose anything, and everything should be like a 2x, but you're hoping for a few 4x's or 5x's in there because you're deploying $1 billion, and you just don't want you just don't want to lose anything. You don't want anything to be less than S&P 500 return, or else people would be betting on the S&P 500.
So how much do you bet on the people versus the hard numbers?
Early stage is all about the people, because inevitably it's like the plan is cool and it excites us, but the plan's gonna most likely, we've seen very rarely seen plans that meet the number.
Have you ever
First
seen
of all, everybody's selling. If
Ever.
they're going in
Ever.
and they're going in and they're giving you a plan that's conservative, then they're not selling.
Yeah. Have you ever seen one? I've sat through two. I've gone to to Riverbank
Yeah.
Capital meetings, and I'm like, you never find one that actually holds, right?
Well, there's a whole hockey stick, and in the back of our minds, it's like, okay, that's cool. Let's just cut that in half. In the back of our minds, is it still cool, and is it still going to get there? And but it's not just that. That is important because, well, you think you have 15 months runway, but you're probably going to have like 8 when the revenue really starts flowing. But it's just they're going to have to weed, dodge, pivot, and you need to bet on the team when it's small. And we've been in situations where like 2 people co-found, and within 12 months, one of the co-founders is out. We're like, oh God, But as long one of those founders is in it to win it, but we feel kind of comfortable. So it's definitely about the person.
Yeah. So, how much actual skin in the game? Talk to us a little bit about what you would consider skin in the game for an entrepreneur, right? I mean, is it somebody's moonlighting and they're putting their own cash in? They've quit their job and they're doing it. So what is it you look at to say, what, this person? I believe in this person. I believe that they're committed, right?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you. I mean, quantitatively. And it's weird, but if they've got a wife and kids or something, that takes some kahunas, and they're probably in it. But they could also fold pretty quickly, right? If I look at that and that's their situation, and they're like, "What are you paying yourself?" It's like $25K a year. I'm thinking, family might not be too happy if this thing doesn't, get to where it needs to be. So.
Yeah.
But skin in the game doesn't have to be cash. People think they have to come up. The founder's putting in $100,000 or something. If they're basically discounting their salary, then they're giving it a run, and that's usually what it takes. Then we'll see deals where like, wait, what are you paying yourself next year? $200,000 in the first year. The other thing we look for is obviously track record is important, but in startup world, I like seeing hungry. And that money's not everything, but it's nice to see people that are a little hungry. And if they're kind of starving artists per se, they might be a little bit more motivated. But they don't have, long story short, they don't have to show up with cash. They show up with a sacrifice, or they show up with a motivation. And it could be the passion of what they're doing. That's huge. Just seeing the passion. And I said this the other day, 90% of communication is nonverbal. I guarantee you right now on this podcast, 90% of what may be being said by us is actually cues, highlights, inflections, pauses, and everything else. Nobody's going to remember the specific words I say, but it's how you say it. And that's what we're looking for from these entrepreneurs.
So the other end of the spectrum, the institutional investors, right? You see them kind of getting into different spaces now. What are you seeing on the landscape, right? So you're kind of in the catbird seat, right? Because you've been through the startup acquisition process.
Yeah.
Now you're in a situation where you're part of a bunch of angel investors, and you also are investing in new technologies for your current gig with Culmen. So talk to us a little bit about what you see for the institutional side.
Yeah, we really have been. I mean, I'm still, I can see deals from the Culmen hat with the Culmen hat on. I like to think that there's not a geospatial deal on the East Coast that I don't at least see a small deck for, a highlight sheet and get a good run at it. But from an institutional side, I'll shout out to Jim Hunt over at Lavrock. Those guys are awesome, and they're a partner native, and we're trying to do more with them. But that guy's been a geospatial wizard his whole life, and they just know how to find them. They got a number of them in the portfolio. Morpheus Space, Cesium, some other things, a whole mix of things over there. And there are a variety of things that people are investing in, and it's really this explosion of sensor capabilities. With explosion of sensor capabilities comes the explosion of the potential that something can be gleaned by that, whether it's cars going down the road in the inner city and scanning with LiDAR, looking for changes that then affect a lower cost of maintenance for utility infrastructure for the city or whatever. It's just it's awesome. And it, of course, starts usually in the military side, but, it then kind of bleeds over. It eventually is like affordable commercially.
Yeah, I've always found, right from the get go, I got into the business, looking at satellite imagery, and that's how I was, it was. But I didn't actually start with satellites. I actually started with airborne, right? So I was actually, I was a commercial pilot, and I got hired part time to go do some commercial camera operating and piloting, right? So I had a girlfriend at the time that introduced me to somebody who says, "Hey, you got to talk to Al. Al has his own company," and so that's sort of how I got in it. But it seems like a billion years ago, and now if you think about all of the location enabled devices, right? Talk to us a little bit about what's going on, with the acquisition that you mentioned at the outset a couple of years ago, right? So we've got Centrifuge, and that that's a really powerful tool. Truth in advertising. I used to work with Steve at Object FX, right? So I just follow him. Every time he shows up someplace, I seem to follow him, right? Steve.
Steve's been a staple of the community. I remember I wanted to buy Object Effects. That was basically 3 months left on SpadeAx odometer to sell to GeoEye. It's kind of risky to buy something just before you sell your own company. Like, Steve, I can't help you, but I tell you what, I know somebody who buy your company, and we it got bought by Transvoyant and helped them out. But Steve and I reunited, with Centrifuge, and guy can walk in any government building with his full scope poly and talk about anything with
he's a rock star.
Real credibility. It's amazing, and a good feel for things. Centrifuge is a data visualization tool. It's been around forever, and it's just a quality tool. To be honest, it was a value play. And coming in over at Culmen, we were looking for something that would give us a chip at the table. You got to differentiate yourself a little bit in anything you do. And Culmen, my colleagues at Culmen, it didn't start out as a technology business. It's really a counter-proliferation, international security, and logistics support company with a rich tradition. Going to be close to 300 employees, and we're 300 employees. We've doubled revenue since I've been there. I can't take all credit for that, but in 2 years. And it didn't have a technology chip, and like, hey, Dan, this little thing here is on the market, and I know from my M&A world, especially when I was at GeoEye and other places, big companies, they can't buy anything small. It costs the same amount of due diligence to buy. Some entrepreneurs take note. Big companies need to spend a lot of money on acquisition. They'll spend $10 million in internal due diligence costs, support costs to buy something sometimes. And, so they're not going to buy a company for $5 million when it costs them $10 million to figure it out. And, and so what happens is there's like, a market for doing small ball M&A that people just miss out on the goods. So I kind of sift through that from time to time, especially if you don't have a lot of pocket change for M&A. at the time. I was like, hey, we can bite this deal off. We can absorb the G&A easy. Cut $1 million of costs out within, on a run rate basis within 1 quarter. And I can walk in just about every intelligence community customer within 30 days. And I like that. You can't buy that with BD people, but we got Steve as well. So we did get a BD guy. And so I look at it as a quality value play. And people are like, oh, but use Tableau. And, Tableau is multi-billion with 1,000 software developers, and you're going to get something good with Tableau. But we've got a little niche component, and it's the tool in the toolbox we always use. Jim Stokes, shout out. We used to always talk about tool in the toolbox. There's a tool for everything. And our tool, sometimes you need screwdrivers, sometimes you need the hammer and whatever. And this tool does what it does really well for an analyst journey to explore data and visualize it. And it can be geospatial, and you can derive something from it that other things can't do very well. And it's great. So we are going to take a major, I kind of get into it on this call, but on this podcast, but we're gonna have some big news, I think, here to start the year. We're gonna take a really cool disruptive direction with it.
Hey, if you feel like using us as kind of an early release, let us know. On the other hand, Mark, I'm going to throw you a curveball because it looks like there is a few people watching us, and there's questions coming in. Okay. One that's a little bit unrelated, but it's come up. So the article Seeking Alpha a few weeks ago put out the website Seeking Alpha put out an article related to Maxar, and they actually put out the estimate that Maxar could be positioning itself to be acquired within 12 to 15 months. What do you think about that?
Well,
non-agile is actually being recorded, man.
Yeah, I've got a lot of friends at Maxar. I think that one of the best things of Maxar is, of course, the services group. I think they'd probably love to spin that out, take the cash, and maybe, I'm sure the services group would love to spin out and be their own team anyway. I'm sure Tony Frazier would love that. I'm sure he's tried, but the integrators that are out there have traditionally shied away from owning hard assets in space. They all have, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I don't know who's buying them.
Oh, that would be my question. I'm like, they're a big geospatial company. They got a good mix of analytics, and if they just keep on growing,
they're already publicly traded. The stock price has recovered really well. It's really done well. Just keep going. And
just be their thing.
They got rid of that Canadian piece. They lowered their debt massively, and I think it's positioned really well. What I'd love to see those guys do, to be honest, my philosophy on this is don't be afraid to do smaller investments, minority investments, and really and even small acquisitions. And I always used to say is we passed on Mapbox out of GOI, okay? Things like that. And so you could, yeah, we did. I didn't. I was like, do this deal.
What was the pushback? Come on, tell us this. I want to hear.
Gunderson is probably super happy that didn't work out. I'm sure he's super happy.
Oh yeah.
But he went the Series A route, and the rest is history. And I would say these companies, they want to spend so much money on M&A, and it has to be a bigger thing. Well, screw that. Have a smaller team that looks at some smaller deals, that doesn't spend a gazillion dollars of due diligence to do something. Start a little fund. Okay, you can't put $1 million in an acquisition pool, then maybe capitalize Maxar Ventures with $25 million. You spend a gazillion dollars on satellites. Capitalize. That's not going to impact EBITDA. Put $25 million aside, start Maxar Ventures, and then have a little team or a guy like me or somebody else with that on that. And we'll co-invest alongside with like Lavrock and other people and do some great deals that if you then like, and you can stitch into your strategic tentacles, then you can pluck them off when they're successful. That would be what I would do. Hint, Todd.
Todd.
Tony.
Intern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dan. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll wait for more questions coming from the peanut gallery here because they're a little bit generalized over there. So, what do you got, Darryl?
Yeah, I'm curious, Mark. Slightly different twist on the same thing, right? So you mentioned, work that's going on the East Coast, and that you probably have at least sniffed at, some sort of package. What about talk a little bit about the SmallSat community, right? Because that's not just East Coast, right? And that's kind of a global phenomenon that's really having a fairly major impact back sort of to the geospatial world. It doesn't. I mean, our conversations don't always have to be about geospatial, but it's really to me, having watched where they started off with a couple dozen people showing up at a small sat conference out in Utah, right, at Utah State, and now we got how many small sats that are literally already have launch date planned.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And standards, right? So
Right.
They started developing standards like the PC industry. Here's the motherboard, and okay, you guys go develop chips, and there's a standard for plugging the chips in, and you guys develop memory, and here's these DIMM and SIM sockets that there's a standard. And they, once they started saying, okay, everything has got to be crammed into this case, and and we're going to provide the backplane for power, and blah blah blah. It was awesome, and they're so smart. They borrowed a play that essentially Dell invented, in my opinion, Michael Dell. But I even myself didn't anticipate what would happen like that. I was like, of course we knew EO was just more and more like, well, who wants to put more EO up? But then again, if you can put a small sat EO up, that's maybe not, it might be 80% as good, but you can sell the product for 10% of the cost, then I'll take that because it's good enough. And it's not just EO, of course, there's RF, and there's ambient and temperature and all kinds of stuff, and then different applications, and it's kind of like, because it's affordable, hey, give it a shot. I couldn't believe that. And now I've always been a huge fan of all the combinatorial aspects of that data. So layering all that data to get some kind of derived solution is the coolest part about all of that.
That is the coolest part. So that's the part that I want to start, right? So here's my entrepreneurial gauntlet that I'll throw down for you. I want to start a company that will literally be we're going to call ourselves the phenomenologists.
Yeah.
And we're literally going to take all of these data.
I got to work on your names here.
Okay, so the phenoms, right?
Phenoms.
Right, the phenoms. And what we're going to do is we're going to take every chunk of data that anybody wants to give to us, not be the underwriter labs, but we're going to be the ones that figure out what you can do with combinations of data, and what you can do, what are the limits of use for your particular data, given the fact that maybe it's a 5-meter data set. Okay, so what can you really get with that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about nears, from a military standpoint, right? Can I recognize a tank or an aircraft or something like that? But there are other practical applications that will result in analytics. Because my hypothesis is nobody wants to buy data anymore. Everybody wants an answer, but they don't want to have to actually pay for pixels.
Right, and who wants to process all that data? So if you can skip getting the infrastructure investment and just get the answer through like a web service, and Descartes doing a lot with that, API sets and so forth. You give them a picture, and they'll come back and tell you like a picture of a tennis court, and give them a geographic area, and they'll give you the points on the map that match with some confidence score where the tennis courts are. You don't have to process the data; you're just extracting the.
Well, I'm wondering when they're just going to skip to, why not just a Google Assistant or Alexa for Intel at that point, and just skip ahead. I mean, I know companies like Diffio were doing that at GeoInt, but something along those lines.
Yeah, and the data is proliferating. So the more the platforms then absorb the data, and the platforms can provide the answers, and just customers don't have to deal with setting up environments and all the Hadoop stacks, and then hire 3 more people to process it to maybe barely differentiate themselves. Now, as far as data analysis goes, if I may touch on the data analysis piece,
Of course.
which is my strength, is you've got to run with your data scientists. Is there an additive element to any new data set? You test your receiver operator curves, any improvements in the model, and various generations of the model, and you see if the cost of the data is worth additive to the model or swapping a data set out, all of that kind of stuff. And then, of course, with AI, if you can train these things, and you send it a bunch of data layers, and it tells you, well, it's this layer, and this layer weighted like this, that gives you a precise answer for what you're looking for. Those kinds of things are pretty cool. So that minimizes your data buy next go.
Yeah, and that's our guest last month, Colleen Kelly McHugh, and that's what she does, right? And so
Kelly used to work for me.
I know, that's why I mentioned it. It's like, see, you are the tree from which all knowledge flows, right?
Yeah, I'm the Kevin Bacon of geospatial.
You are, man. But you're like
the DC area.
You're like
5
a
degrees
half
of
degree of
separation.
Kevin Bacon, because nobody's more than like 2 or 3 steps away. It's not 6 degrees of separation.
The chat channels over here is saying Matthew McConaughey, Mark.
Okay.
Oh, nice reference.
That's a pretty good one. I'll take it.
All right. Yeah.
But she did. So shout out to Colleen. She was doing all the crime analyst stuff when we brought her over to SpadeAct and for DHS for us and LE. And, for y'all ever cool about that, like that, interested in that area, it was all the crime modeling, why are crimes happening in certain places, and looking at the spatial forecast stuff there, which is still fun to do. I'm going to hopefully help a client out with that later this month.
Yeah, that's work that's ongoing, and it's not gonna that ain't gonna go away. That's neat. So
yeah, I was still like, even just like 2 years ago, Planet Risk, we had a bunch of power companies in Chicago. We were running the data on the incidents that were happening around their crews, and they literally wanted to know which neighborhoods to go into at which times on what days for the minimal amount of exposure or risk to violent crime. And we could do it. And it was not obvious. It was like, in this neighborhood, 2 to 3 a.m. on Tuesdays, in this neighborhood, 12 to 1 a.m. on Wednesdays, and in this neighborhood, 2 to 3 p.m. on Fridays or something. And if it's raining, then, it's whatever. And they loved it. They were like, and I love that. I want to get back into doing that some more. Hopefully we find some good customers for that.
Well, that will be, I look forward to seeing that. And Adam will be your test case, right? So
with that said, what area of analytics, you just kind of hinted at a little bit, but what area of analytics with the current technologies emerging right now, you got your RF, tons of small sats, tons of even emerging sensor modes, people, obviously radar is doing an emerging thing, but people are even talking about bringing a bigger play into IR into the mix, even nighttime IR. So, so what's got you excited about taking advantage of if you start one of these projects again?
Oh, there's so much. Oh man, I like the, I kind of like it all, Adam. I like
That's not fair.
Data. I want it all. I like collapsing the data and figuring out what mix of it is for a certain project. It's like having all the spices in the spice rack. But what excites me the most is, I don't think you can really talk about geospatial right now without ignoring terrestrial collection. And that's just expanding rapidly. And I'm not talking about the mobile device stuff that's in the news negatively sometimes. I'm talking about just anything like Wi-Fi hotspots, and like, which devices are connected to those, or LiDAR, like I said, for utility management. And I'll say this too. What excited me a couple of years ago was all the risk management of this with Planet Risk, and I still love that. But we found that customers you get more money if you're selling opportunity than you are if you're selling risk management. That was one of the things we learned there. It's fun to be the hero and build risk management solutions using geospatial data. But the security departments don't have a lot of money. But if you can sell something that makes people money, you're going to get money, because you can hey, pay us X amount of dollars per year and you can make X amount more. I would encourage entrepreneurs to look at that from that perspective. So what kinds of things help in that regard? But there's always going to be the opportunity for people to save money as well, which is still interesting.
Well, it's, we have these conversations internally about, engaging with government, right? So you don't ever make money for the government, but you can allow government officials to reallocate resources. You can save time, and time is money, right? So it's,
that's what you're thinking about what's served in the Beltway community. How do you save lives, protect money, and optimize resources?
Right. It's a big one. Now, so talk to us a little bit about, what you think data-wise about IoT, because IoT to me, I'm not going to go on a long rant, but I see two very different camps of people that have sort of emerged with from the early acceptance of IoT, and I think we're still very, very early in IoT, obviously.
So at the end of the day, people will go, where did IoT and geospatial cross? Where did the line get fuzzy? And obviously, at the end of the day, is there a spatial component to the IoT feedback that matters? And if there's a spatial component of the IoT, such as a position, then all of a sudden it's it's in our domain again. And because now you can layer data on this other axes of X and Y, or lat long, or obviously time. And you've got essentially, I think, people that are used to dealing with bigger data on the geospatial data side because of satellite data and all that, who were ready and willing and had all the chops, also serving the U.S. government and massive scale stuff, whether it's at the fort, NSA to the population, or other places that could go in and deal with IoT at scale. So that's, if you're talking about, there's IoT that's non-geo, and it's what's the level of all the Keurig coffee machines in production that are syncing with some URL at some point, and the Keurig doesn't need to know exactly the location. Is okay, it's at this address. But if it's something that is really beaconing and you're going to have that spatial element to it, then you really are layering. And it could be a battlefield, right? That'll drive, the next battlefield will drive a lot of this innovation, which right now can only happen out of SOCOM, most likely, because they're always doing stuff. But then you need to know how things are happening, why they're happening, in context, in time, and in space, to derive some insight. And it's going to stay big there.
Yeah, what I've seen emerging, and it's, I'm sure this is probably way overly simplistic. There's the adopters, and then there's the haters, right? So from a commercial standpoint, you have people that are I'm not having a Nest in my house. I'm not having anything that's connecting to anything because I don't trust it. And then you have the people who are that'll make my life easier. I don't care. My life's then, and I got 5,000 million Facebook friends anyhow, and I tweet every hour, so it doesn't matter. Go ahead and take my stuff. I don't care.
I'll tell the audience my old man story around that, and that's how many people had a BlackBerry in the audience? I'm imagining all these hands going up, right?
Oh, I could, but I refused.
So I remember when the iPhone came out. I remember the iPhone came out, and I'm I'd never use that because I need to touch a keyboard. That was my story. I want to feel the button, and I can do it blindfolded in early, probably very bad texting and driving, but I could feel the keyboard, so I'll never switch. And then ultimately you realize, iPhone 2, oh, well, there's all these virtual applications. I can use the entire screen. So it becomes so convenient, and you just learn to adapt. Well, I don't screw the tactile. The benefit is too great to pass. So I think that analogy, I'll never forget that in my mind. And for those that know that transition, and why BlackBerry's not really around anymore, is because if they don't think it's going to work, it's one of those things. Well, you know what? I think the market's going to speak. The Nest becomes. There's too many good things about the Nest. I didn't think I would do Eero, and I think it's owned by Amazon. But you know what? I had all kinds of Wi-Fi problems. I ordered the Eero, dropped in the three pucks, and dropped in a couple of extenders. I haven't had a Wi-Fi problem on my house in 2 years.
Yeah, everybody. I think you're going to get those. You're going to get those
But I
folks.
know they're spying on my DNS calls. Although you can hack that hackathon, you can actually upgrade. You can actually change your DNS to Open DNS and basically, take it out of Amazon's view. But but it's too convenient. So yeah, adopt that stuff. Or you're gonna. It's too good.
Now, where's the fine line when you got stuff like RF technology coming out, and that's becoming more transparent to people being aware of that thing, that those types of technologies. For example, you got the Hawkeye 360, for example. They're up in the air. You got Cleos. You got a bunch of others, Spire even, and then people are all of a sudden aware of these things. Are these just detecting the emitters, or are they actually understanding communications? And I think there's a lot of education behind what this technology is truly doing, because I think there's a fine line with talking about consumer products and helping people understand what the privacy transparency is there. But all of a sudden, if these things are just out in the open about these technologies blindly collecting what people have, people understand what that is. And so how do you, where's that fine line where does the market demand with big companies and government just overwhelm consumer or public concerns, or is it ignored? What do you think about that, Mark?
I like that.
It's a good one. You threw a doozy at. How much time do you have?
There's like 3 parts, and each one of them has a subpart. So I'm going to see you.
Wherever you want to take it.
Yeah, no, right. It's I would say, first of all, if we went and found 100 people on the street corner, they wouldn't know who Hawkeye 360 or Spire is. So.
No, it's about awareness, right? But here's the analogy,
so
Mark.
they don't know.
5G, you got those nuts out there who think 5G is causing cancer left and right. But it's a bandwidth fight, between the guys who want to release 5G, and it's competing with existing satellite communication networks that have existed for 20, 30, 40 years. So that's the real battle. But people understand that. They think this new signal is going to cause them cancer or something. So
I remember, okay, we'll roll it back, and I don't mean to show my age or anything, but you remember when the EO was the resolution concerns? And I remember, beating my head against the desk over at GeoI. What do you mean we can't license 1 foot? I mean, you can collect it from line. Why can't we license 1 foot from the SAT? And all this stuff around, well, you can see all the trampolines, and the trampoline owners, don't want to tell the insurance companies and all this stuff. Or you could see people like what they have in their backyard, how many tires they got stacked up, or if they've got, who knows, some kind of field, maybe a legal field in their backyard of some sort. And, but it was steamrolled. It was steamrolled out. And I think there's very few cases where the government can say, you can't do this, because if it's essentially going to identify U.S. citizens, and I was on the phone with a specific person from a specific senator's office today, even discussing this issue. And basically, as long as you're not selling identifiable U.S. person data to the U.S. government without a court order, you're okay. There you go. And so, anything else?
No. I didn't mean to take it into that direction, but I think it's an interesting topic.
But that's the direction of privacy.
Yeah.
That is exactly the direction. If it's
That
a
is
12
it.
truck,
If you're selling identifiable Mark E. Dumas with this device was here, here, and here, and that's part of your data delivery, and you give that to anyone, or at least back to the U.S. government, then they're going to have a problem with it.
So we get some smart ass who writes a social on this rooftop, and then you're in trouble.
Well, so
Yeah.
there was a study that was done, but here's another interesting piece when we talking about, personally identifiable information, right? Or personally identifiable data, right? So there was a study that was done, I believe it was by MIT. I'd have to go back and check for sure, but I'm pretty sure I'll attribute it to our folks up in Boston, where they actually took anonymized cell phone data, and it was, I don't know how many millions of records, and they literally reverse engineered patterns of life, and could actually, they figured out something like 95 or 97% of the calls. They knew exactly where the people lived, and they knew where they worked, they knew where they shopped, and they knew their names.
Tax records. Class.
Right. They literally said, this is what it all looks like, and there was no name, there were no addresses. It was just the information that came off your cell phone with the time and date stamp and location.
My understanding is well, it's like basically if you can do that and then you're licensing that to hedge funds or other commercial people, you're probably okay.
Yeah.
My understanding is if that data comes back into the U.S. government to like DHS, ICE, CBP, IRS, then you're going to get shut down. It's probably what's going to ultimately happen. Like the government can't collect in this country for a good reason on U.S. citizens, which we know.
Yeah, it can't without, for law enforcement, they can get a warrant and go do that.
With the warrant, you're fine. Right. So that business model probably is not going to be, unless they put a court order thing around it for government use for U.S. citizens, it's not going to be a viable long term, is my guess.
So that's Adam reminding me.
That's the line I feel. Yeah. That's certainly the line I was told earlier today.
It's the interpretation of 12333, right, and what that looks like, right, which is the presidential directive that allows for some level of use of national assets, and that those are writ large.
Yeah.
To for internal uses. It's really specific. That's why you have very specific PUMs or proper use memoranda that are actually formulated for every time that happens. And you can have standing PUMs, and they do exist for things like earthquake mitigation, and looking at ice flows, and when disasters happen, things like that.
Or suspicious behavior, or
right,
rolls up a human trafficking operation. Well, you're going to sniff everything in that area that from one of these troves, because you probably got a reason to explore it and see what else is in there.
But I never did, and it's probably a horrific thing to even think about. But when you have a major natural disaster, and you can't find people. Right. And so why wouldn't you want to go back through? And I'm sure there's probably some sort of exemption for that too. And so they can use it and say, hey, when's the last time we actually, we got a ping from their cell phone? At least we'll know, some place within these, the area with this.
That would be relatively easy because you're not getting pattern of life. You just say, we're doing a snapshot, non-identified ping, or a sequence of pings over the last 2 hours. And we're only going to actually get the last ping, and just because you can't make sure it's not an anomalous ping.
So
you pull that through as a heat map or something, right?
So I didn't quite mean to make the conversation about privacy necessarily, but it does, from a business aspect, kind of make me think of a lot of the crowdsourcing applications that are out there. Folks are, from an intelligence standpoint, you obviously had, I don't want to even bring up things like TomNod, because I don't think that's a one-off thing that was acquired and did a very focused thing. But there's other ones out there, we'll call it like TaskRabbit and things like that people are using for crowdsourcing, even analytic tasking as well. Hey, can you, but then managing the information of the sources, as an analytics company, how do you build confidence in those sources and manage the and manage the data behind the people?
I mean, we're talking like, like a geospatial collect in a polygon, and you're getting a survey or a picture. Like, how do you trust that?
Well, not even trust it, but also, how do you treat them? Or do you treat them like an Uber app where you have them go out and do these things, these specific tasks? It's one thing to say, "Hey, go out and take a picture of a cell tower," but hey, I want you to go take a picture of the front gate of this military installation. You get into borderline fringe, put them in danger, or maybe safety concerns where maybe you don't even know what that spot is, or even if there's dangers involved, but you
guys
throw them in a safety situation.
You're gonna have to get Matt McNabb on the next deal here, since he's CEO of Native, and he's pretty smooth.
Hey, bring it, man. Would love to have him.
You guys would love that. I'd come again if there's room for a little small window in the left hand corner.
Yeah, I can make this a panel easy, 4 or 5 people. Easy.
Yeah, so he's got guys that do some of that, and he had them in Syria, in the middle of the Civil War, and and somehow you build those collection networks. You got Spatial Networks, that company, same thing, I think you'll find that there's people willing to ride around on a moped for $5 that are delivered virtually. Yeah, that's just going to happen, and if it's and what you do to mitigate it is, these guys are 1099. So he's like, hey, look, you don't do it if you think it's at risk. First of all, you just got to put it in their hands. Second of all is of course, you build a system that qualifies and scores these guys over time. And when you're not sure, you send 3 out and see if the answer comes back the same. And then you can score them all as potentially viable, right? You build the trust. Just like mechanical Turk models.
But that's the same thing that
you vote the answer, and then you can read out potentially bad collectors.
So as an investor, how do you evaluate data companies like that, in which their data is very, we'll call it volatile with their collection methods?
And we could be just on that note, we could be talking about drone collections that come in from hobbyists, and there's like a marketplace for the drone data.
There is, that's true, but in a lot of ways, I feel like that's more stable and established because it's easier to regulate that from an airspace perspective. Get caught even if you don't follow the rules.
Yeah, I don't know. I that's probably a little bit outside my lane. I don't know exactly where that's going to go, but because we haven't really, we made the Native investment, and we liked what Dan and Jim Hunt did with Native out of Lavrock, and Riverbend just basically sidecarred that deal, and we bet on Matt and his team, and it was a platform, so we knew it was scalable, and we knew the dogs were eating the dog food, in the marketplace ahead and inside the Beltway, and it was working, and it just like the upside was commercial with the PepsiCos and all of that of the world for survey, and we knew the platform, this company could be like 20 people or 30 people, whatever he's got, but it could have thousands of collectors that could ultimately be ranked on credibility, some kind of credibility score.
Yeah, and just to go back, I have no problem with those types of technologies or use cases. I think it's fascinating to see how people handle those types of problems within a business. Yeah. And once again, because it's almost like paving new ground,
Yeah, and an example use case he likes to cite, just in case the audience wondering about that, it's like, what's the price of I don't know, a gallon of milk in 10 different grocery stores in Zimbabwe. And the client may be whoever that needs that's somehow driving some kind of consumer price index change over time that may be a leading indicator for some kind of bet. I mean, okay, pretty awesome. or the Department of State that needs that. They want to know if the price of wheat's going to go up, cause the price of bread go up, and then have an Arab Spring. But what are leading indicators?
Well, thanks a lot, Mark. Darryl, do we have anything else on the palette before we wrap up?
Man, I told you. I mean, this is like, okay, we just got warmed up now. Now we got another 3 or 4 hours. We're just going to sit around, right? And we won't film it. We'll just sit around and chat. But
yeah, fireside.
Thank you so much for spending an hour with us today, and love to have you back. And hey, man, we'll take you up on that offer to arrange a tour panel. How's that sound?
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
I appreciate being on your show, Adam and Darryl. Really enjoyed it. Really smooth for anybody out there thinking about being on their podcast, obviously, and appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with everybody.
I appreciate it, Mark. Thanks very much. And all right, everybody. Well, this is Adam Simmons and Darryl Murdoch with another Adam and Darryl View the World here on Project Geospatial, here with guest Mark Dumas. Thanks.